Hi everyone, my name is Alondra Juarez, and today I will be presenting on George Kelly's timeline. So, I'll be discussing his background, his major theoretical contributions, a timeline of his life events, and historical events that influenced his work. I'll also explain how his theories continue to make an impact on psychology today. For background information, George Kelly was born on April 28th, 1905, in Perth, Kansas. He was both a clinical psychologist and a professor. And something that's really interesting about him is the fact that he got a degree in physics, mathematics, sociology, education, and eventually psychology. So his vast academic background strongly influenced how he developed his own theories. And rather than focusing on biology like many behaviorist psychologists do, he focuses on how we interpret behavior. So, this idea ties into his most famous theory, the personal construct theory. The personal construct theory states that each individual acts as a scientist, interpreting the world around them through personal constructs. So, what he means is that we're constantly building mental frameworks that help us predict and interpret our own experiences. So, for example, a person could be walking their dog down the street, and someone who's walking along the same sidewalk could see them and think, oh, how cute! I really want to pet that dog. How adorable. But another person walking right behind them could think, that is terrifying. That dog is terrifying. I want to get as far away as possible from it. So, through our own experiences, we create these constructs in the way in which we view the world. George Kelly also introduced the idea of constructive alternativism, which means that we revise and replace our constructs throughout life. So, this means that there never really is just one way to interpret reality. We all have different experiences and therefore interpret reality differently. And as we learn, as we continue to age and grow, we can always change our personal constructs. It may not be the same from when you were a child, and different beliefs that you once held may be different now. Funnily enough, though, George Kelly didn't actually like being called a cognitive psychologist, but his theories did help shape cognitive psychology today. Here is a timeline of some of the major events in George Kelly's life. As I mentioned before, he was born on April 28th, 1905, in Perth, Kansas. He earned his PhD in psychology in 1931 from the State University of Iowa and worked as a psychotherapist, even creating traveling clinic programs to help people during the Great Depression. In 1943, he joined the US Navy as an aviation psychologist during World War II, where he observed how people anticipate and respond under stress. After the war in 1946, he became a professor at Ohio State University. This is where his ideas and theories began to form. In 1954, he served as the president of the clinical and consulting divisions of the American Psychological Association. In 1955, he published his major work, The Psychology of Personal Constructs. In 1961, he went on a world tour where he spoke about his many publications. In 1965, he held the Riegels Chair of Behavioral Science at Brandeis University for about 2 years before dying in 1967 on March 6 in Waltham, Massachusetts. It says 1965, but it's 1967. Here are some world events that occurred during George Kelly's timeline. So, 1929 sparked the beginning of the Great Depression. So, through the years 1929 to 1939, these were known as the Great Depression years. So, 1943 was right in the middle of the World War II period. in 1950, cognitive psychology began to rise. In 1952, the first DSM was published. And throughout the years 1954 to 1968, the US civil rights movement was on the rise. So, George Kelly has a strong scientific background with a Bachelor of Arts degree in physics and mathematics. So, this is what led him to the belief that all people are scientists creating their own hypotheses, constantly testing and forming new ones. During the Great Depression, he created a traveling clinic program to help out families. So he saw that people were not only struggling with poverty, but struggling to make sense of their own lives, which is what led him to focus on how meaning is important for our own survival. He served as an aviation psychologist during World War II, which basically showed him how anticipation and our experiences are so important for staying alive, especially during such a dangerous time. He spent about 20 years at Ohio State University as both a psychologist and a professor, which is what led him to the formation of his theories, particularly the personal construct theory. He was one of the first pioneers of cognitive psychology, and the rise of cognitive psychology from behaviorism is what supported his development of his theory and made it more worldwide accepted. So, unlike other psychologists at the time, George Kelly did not agree with the development of the DSM. He believed it to be too restrictive and rigid and disease oriented. Because for him, he believed that psychological problems reflected difficulties in meaning making, not necessarily disease or illness. The civil rights movement also influenced his theory of constructive alternativism, as this is where we saw those individual differences in constructs, as our constructs about gender, race, and identity are constantly challenged and reconstructed throughout our lives. They continue to change throughout history and will continue to change in the future. Now, George Kelly's legacy still remains strong today, as his ideas were revolutionary for his time, since his approach to psychotherapy was more client based and cognitive. His repertory grid technique became a staple in psychology and is still used today, especially to understand personal identity and perspectives, unique perspectives. This is a interview in which people are asked to identify their own constructs, basically. He also influenced cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is one of the most common and effective therapeutic approaches used today in practices. His approach continues to influence therapy, treatment, and even education today, as he had a rather positive outlook on humans. He believed them to be capable of growth, adaptability, curiosity, learning beings, people who shape their own experiences, rather than basing them on experiences early on in childhood or biological factors. Instead of just diagnosing someone with a disorder, he believes that the optimal approach is to explore their own construct, their own personal constructs, and gradually change the way they view themselves and the world. Through his theories, we are able to understand other people's perspectives, gain empathy, and understand how our own experiences may differ from others. Overall, you could say that his theories consisted of growth mindset, which is extremely important for today in today's age, where things are constantly changing and we as humans need to learn how to adapt to these changes. Lastly, here are my resources. Thank you for listening to my presentation.